My name's Harry Taylor. I'm an independent consulting actuary specialising in DC pensions, and I have a question for Maggie Craig and Dean Murphin. This is clearly going to be a very rapidly developing market with a huge amount of focus on the customer. Particular customer I'm concerned, I think the most at risk are those with, say, pots between 20,000 and, say, over 100,000, just over 100,000, because these are the people who typically would not have been engaged in the advice process. My question is quite a simple one. The core issue seems to be, what do you do if the customer doesn't get engaged? And for auto-enrolment in the accumulation stage, the solution under auto-enrolment was the creation of well-governed default funds with lots of mechanisms to make sure that they produce and they do what they say they'll do on the tin. The issue that's emerged from this research is there's potentially a group of consumers in this at-risk group who do not become engaged. So my question for Dean and for Maggie is, as the market emerges, could you see the emergence of something that's a bit like a default solution for these kind of consumers who nonetheless still continue to be disengaged in what they do with their pot? Or are we just going to say, no, sorry, when you get to the end of it, you have to become engaged, and if you don't become engaged, then nothing will happen. Nobody will pay out the money, nothing will happen.
Maggie, do you want to take that first?
That is a tricky one. I get your point, and I mean, people have talked in the past about, is there a kind of philosophical contradiction between the auto-enrolment mentality and the freedom of choice, which I'm not so sure there is, because I think once people have the money, they do tend, they then want to have choice about what they do with their own money. I think there are a number of things. Some of the experience from Australia, for example, showed that particularly once pots get to a certain level, people do become more engaged. And I take Ben's point about not picking up examples from other cultures that are irrelevant. But one of the things that they did notice in Australia was two things. Firstly, that once a person's pot got to the point where it was about a year's salary, it mattered to them. It wasn't an absolute figure, it was a relative figure. And secondly, in these freedoms in Australia, smaller pots, very often people did take the cash, but again, as pots got larger, they were more likely to look for income. So I think there's something around the fact that people are going to be in auto-enrolled schemes and are going to start seeing their money coming through, and as it becomes theirs, there will be a gradual process of increased engagement. I think engagement has to be actively encouraged in the at-retirement space, because if you think about it, what we've done is completely turned on its head everything I learned as a baby pensions administrator 100 years ago when I joined the industry. At that point, you put all your effort into engaging people to try to get them to join, and then engagement sort of tapered off as they all just trotted off and bought an annuity. Now it's the other way around. People come in the door, and the job then is to start to engage them from then, to say, okay, you're in the default fund, should you be paying a bit more, that kind of thing. When it comes to at-retirement, I think there are a number of ways. One is obviously whatever publicity surrounds pension-wise. One is, as Lord Hutton says, I think this is a journey. I think the guidance will develop. How does that develop? How do we encourage people to do it? Another is encouragement from scheme trustees, from employers, from providers to take this guidance. What I struggle to, a couple of times people have said to me, you need to make the guidance mandatory, and at that point I think, well, how do you make something mandatory if there's freedom of choice? So it is a spectrum, and I don't think I've got a perfect answer. And I think the referral to other forms of specialist advice, whether it's debt advice or regulated advice, which will be part of the guidance piece, I think that's also relevant. So I haven't got a silver bullet, but I think there are a number of things we can and will be doing.
Okay, now I think you asked the question of Dean as well, did you? So we get Dean to respond, but I see that Jackie would also like to come in. So Dean, you first?
Yeah, I think just to echo some of what Maggie said is obviously ultimately if the end consumer doesn't find their way to us, there's that initial stage in terms of that engagement being encouraged. One of the things we made a very conscious decision about, as I've touched on already, was the fact that we don't want consumers to feel that as soon as they engage with us that it's going to cost them money, and that there is a process of dialogue and investigation, and in particular we do think things like the pyramid that I showed you will soon be on our website and will be an interactive tool that consumers can actually just go and play with. They don't have to talk to us, they don't have to give us their details, they can just start to think about what they're trying to do. I think a big part of it, and that's why we do hold a lot of confidence in this research, one in terms of the breadth and in terms of quantity and qualitativeness, is that facilitating that initial engagement enough where people can be quite forthright about what am I really trying to do. So you remove it from the pension conversation and from a product, and it's just what you're trying to do. If you want more income, or income of any degree, let's have a look at that. And none of that has to constitute paying for advice. Again, it can be tools, it can be other things. And I think, and I know, without speaking for Maggie, I know the FCA are very encouraging in terms of around what a firm's doing to help engage with people. And I think that will play a big part.
Okay then, Dean, thanks very much. And Jackie?
Harry, I think you've hit the nail on the head. It was a great question. And we were all nodding at this end of the table. Yes, we want people to be more financially capable. Yes, we want them to understand the risks and the benefits of the different options. But I think in the short term we all recognise that there's a handful of people who are already in that position. They're nearly all in this room. Yes, guidance has a really key part to play, and it has to be good. Yes, advice has a role to play for those who can access it and afford it, but we know that not everyone will access it or can access it and can afford it. So we need to go beyond that, and certainly with our members, we're avoiding the use of the word default, because there does have to be some kind of active decision by the member, particularly where they're moving into an income generating space and they're crystallising their funds. But we do think that for, particularly in the trust-based world, that trustees can play a role in helping shape and build a solution, maybe not in their own scheme, but maybe elsewhere, that they can direct their members to, which will help them deliver a good outcome for their members. It may not be perfectly matched to every individual's needs, but it will help them move from, or get beyond the paralysis that will infect many people. And so that's where NAPF is focusing quite a lot of its thought and attention at the moment. But we recognise we need safeguards. So there have to be safeguards for the member if we are going to go down that route, and that's something else that we're actively involved in debating.
Okay. Now finally, Lord Hutton, I think this was a tiny word, I think, on this question.
It's very rare for me to attempt to answer a question that hasn't been posed to me, but I'm going to have a stab at it. I tend to take a slightly different view about this. I think we are embarking on a very different journey now. If you look at auto-enrolment and what lay behind Lord Turner's proposals, he was very much trying to work with the grain of the world as it is, where people are actually not that engaged and want their pension to be professionally managed, and when they retire to have enough income. This is a different world we're going into now, and I don't think it helps us if we try and suggest that actually it's all part of a continuum. I think this is actually quite a different phase in the pension reform journey we're going on, because we are expecting now consumers at this point to be engaged. And we know that's going to be a difficult thing to achieve because of the, this blanket of, we just don't want to know about pensions. Someone can handle that for us. So I think we really do need to focus on this as an issue. Auto-enrolment, I think, has proved to be a success because it's working with the nature of the beast. If we want this reform to work, I think we're going to have to learn everything that we know about behavioural economics and behavioural finance, and then have the debate now about how do we make that work in the new context that we're in. So I think your question is a great one. But I would just finish with this comment. I mean, I think it's very obvious to me as a kind of Whitehall watcher now that the merits of this policy, I think, are clear, and I support the idea of greater choice. It's absolutely in the grain with all of us as we grow, become more informed and so on, and informed consumers. But I think it's very obvious to me that this policy now is having to be kind of debated and considered in a way really you would have thought this would have been at the beginning of the process. So we had the answer to your question a year ago, but we're asking the question now because I think the policy started in one place, and inevitably with policy making, you see it kind of being sort of pushed by these sorts of questions and this sort of report into a slightly different place. Now, you can say that's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm old school. I would have liked this work to have been done before we said to everyone, and there's going to be this new world of freedom.
Okay, thank you, John.
Final point, it's interesting that for once we actually started with what the consumer wants, rather than starting with what the industry wants.